Hello, everyone. We are continuing with our year-by-year exploration of this book, Light Bearer, The Life and Legacy of Swami Kriyananda and the Building of Ananda. We are up to the year 1993, starting in 1969. So let's now say a prayer. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, Friend, Beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, Beloved Master Paramhansa Yogananda, Saints of all religions, dear friend Swami Kriyananda, humbly we bow to you all. Help us to feel your loving presence and to understand from the example of your life and the wisdom of your teachings how we ourselves can follow the path, follow the trail that you have blazed, and walk from delusion into enlightenment, from confinement to freedom, from suffering to bliss. Om. Peace. Amen. As has been my custom through all these classes, I have two sets of photographs, a more or less random set of photographs from 1993 that we'll use to illustrate just what it felt like to be there. And as I scroll through the pictures, I'll fill in different pieces. 1993 was a tremendous year for Ananda. Master Yogananda was born in 1893, so 1993 was the 100th year anniversary of his birth. And even though times like 100 years are man-made distinctions, nonetheless, there's a certain kind of power there. 100 years from his birth, 80 years from the time he came. He came in 1920, so more than that, it was 27 years since he came to America's less, 100 less, like 75. But still, it was a significant milestone. And it happened to coincide with Ananda and the 25th anniversary of Swamiji's founding of Ananda. So it was really a big combination year. And it was also the third year of our lawsuit with SRF. But it was a significant year because very important decisions were made in favor of what we were calling master for the world, as opposed to master as the exclusive property of one spiritual organization. So among the things that happened in 1993 was the original edition of Autobiography of a Yogi was published. I'll explain a little more about that. And also when Swamiji had been a young monk with Master out at the desert retreat that Master had, and he was working on writing his commentary on the Bhagavad Gita. Master had begun to train Swamiji and also commission Swamiji to edit his original writings. But Swamiji had been unable to do that because when he was within SRF, they didn't allow him to work on that. And after he was expelled, he didn't have access to the manuscripts, and even more, he didn't have legal rights. But the judge's decision in 1993 freed up one of the books that Master had wanted him to work on, which was Master's commentary on the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam. So we published the original biography. Swami finished editing the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, Master's commentaries on it. It was the 100th year anniversary of Master's birth, and it was the 25th year of Ananda. So a whole lot of different forces came together. So let's start now watching our first set of photographs, and I'll just talk us through them in whatever way seem appropriate. This one starts with a picture of me. This was 1993 oops, we're not quite there yet. Let's get settled. This was 1993. It was a restaurant in a hotel in Palo Alto, and we were having an Easter Sunday celebration. By September of 1994, Ananda Palo Alto had purchased the temple that we're now in. And then we had our own facilities to have big events. But this was how we managed. We just rent public spaces. Next picture. I think this is just a series of random people pictures from all over. Jaya and Trimurti in the mechanic shop there at Ananda Village. Next picture. There's no order to these pictures. This is, I believe, the Sangha staff. No, this would have been the expanding light staff. Jyotish and Devi were in charge of the guest programs. Biraj is in the middle, Uma, Gyandev, others that we know, Roma and Haridas. Karen Gamau is in the lower left corner. Next picture. A picture of Ananda and Bharat. Bharat's American name is Joseph Cornell, and he's well known globally for his work in nature attunement. Ananda was a founding member of Ananda who just died about 6 months ago. She quite suddenly manifested a very rare and virulent form of cancer, and within 6 weeks was gone. She and I came to Ananda within a month, about 2 months of each other, and are the same age. So it's the beginning of the departure of the founding members. Next picture. Maria and Devarshi. Maria died of cancer maybe 10 or 15 years ago. I say that because for me, these are all my own people. And we have another Ananda going on in the astral world now. So it's quite a lot of us on the other side. Next picture. It says Bhakti Marg. Atman is her husband Atman is the community manager at the village. She and they've raised their son Mark there at Ananda Village. She's in charge of the Spanish ministry. She was born and raised in Spain. Next picture. This is the Betts family. 2 of the 4, eventually 4 children. Many of you know Keshava Betts, who's here in Palo Alto, where I live, but he might have been in his mother's womb because he was born in 94 in May. But that's the oldest boy, Shanti, and next in line, Kashi. Keshava came after that. Sitabai and Balarama. It's fun with them because in the 80s, early 80s, Swamiji put me on the road, basically. He wanted me to travel and teach, and I started going to the Northwest and helped sort of ground the energy in both Seattle and Portland, which eventually led to the centers. And at that time, Balaram and Sitabai were living in Seattle. They didn't have any children then. And they were the core members of our Seattle group. And I used to go up there and would spend 2 or 3 weeks living with them several times a year. And the time when we were doing that, I was just the same age that Keshav is now, in his late 20s. So I knew all these boys before they were born. That's how I think about it. And it's wonderful. One of the wonderful aspects of Ananda is this sort of just cross-generational friendships and relationships, because we've all been together now for so many decades. Both the boys are on their own mostly, but Sitabai and Balaram both still live at Ananda Village. Next picture. This is Narani, and that's we called her Sarah Dog because they were also Sarah Person. Narani moved away from Ananda Village for a period of time. She's been a school teacher there. She's been teaching first, second grade for so long now that children who had Narani as a teacher have now sent their children to Ananda school and have Narani as a teacher. Narani, somewhere in the course of things, acquired a dog, Sarah. And there's a rule against dogs at Ananda Village because they run in packs, and when they bark, they chase the wildlife, and when they bark, they can be heard all over. But Narani, it was time for her to move back into her school position, but she had this dog. So Sarah Dog became an honorary member of Narani's class. And so she lived in the schoolroom, and she became the dog of all the children. So we sort of neatly got around what we were doing. Narani. Next picture. This is in Assisi. Kirtani and Anand are there. The 2 gentlemen on the right are both from England, Stephen Sturgis and Richard Fish. They were both, I believe, in London. And so they came for Kriya and to be at the Assisi Center. Next picture. And Stephen with Jyotish and Devi also in Assisi, I believe. Next picture. This is Narani and her husband Rick and their baby Christian, Morehouse. Narani and I were very, very good friends. After she married and I moved to Palo Alto, it was a little harder to maintain the friendship. But she very, very talented seamstress. And when I went out to teach, I just had a country wardrobe, and I've never been very fashion oriented, so I tended not to like what I saw in the stores. And Navrani just lovingly sewed for me a whole teaching wardrobe, sort of to my somewhat more modest and less time specific clothing. It's just over the years with Ananda, there have been so many opportunities for sweet sharing. Every time I see pictures of myself during those years, I recognize that the clothes that she made for, and she was so talented, you would never know they were made by an individual seamstress. Next picture. Just Haridas and Roma with their little rows. Next picture. Diana and Catherine Kairavi. This was actually a wedding shower for Leela. Next picture. And there's Leela. She's also in the astral world now. She died just before Swami did. She was marrying David Hogendijk. And it was a very sweet friendship between David and Leela. And the whole community was extremely uplifted by their union. In a community, everything that everyone does affects everyone else. And when people have sweet friendships and harmonious marriages and positive, refined connections, it really radiates out from the center to everyone. And David and Leela were one of those wonderful couples. Next picture. This is Nitai with his stepson Prem and his daughter Mirabai. Prem was born, he came to Ananda when he was about 6, and he's lived either at the village or primarily in Sacramento ever since. He never left. He just knew he was home and stayed there. Next picture. Krishna and Palaka. Ananda, I think we had a softball team, if I'm not mistaken. This picture is taken in Palo Alto where they lived for a long time. And I'm pretty sure that's a jersey from the Ananda softball team. I don't think it was bowling. I think it was softball is what it was, or something. Next picture. This was just one of the events, Nitai and daughter Mirabai and me. Next picture. Vyasa and Janaki Devi. Vyasa was nearly a founding member. He came very, very early to Ananda Village. Janaki Devi came a little later, and then they married. Also another warm and lovely couple that blessed the whole community with their friendship. Vyasa was a research scientist. He worked for many years for Xerox. And Swami used to joke that he really wanted to have some, quote, mad scientists at Ananda and set them up in laboratories and hear them cackling maniacally behind the closed doors. So he always said to Vyasa that he was a scientist, but he wasn't mad enough. It was all in good fun, but Swami was always interested in, expanding the realm of knowledge. Vyasa is the co-author of the book about the yugas. He had a particular passionate interest in the yuga theory and collecting information about ancient civilizations and so on. So it was his years of research that made that book possible. He co-authored it with Joseph Selby. Next picture. This is Happy Winningham. Many of you have heard about Happy. She contracted AIDS very, very early in the epidemic and lived at Ananda Village for maybe 8 or 10 years with AIDS and lived heroically. There's a story about her in Swami Kriyananda as we've known him, because she asked Swamiji the very significant question, because there were lots of treatments they were developing, but it was a death sentence, much more, and people died much sooner. And she asked Swamiji, how hard do I fight to live? And he said, as long as you can use your body for God remembrance and increasingly for God realization, you should try to stay alive. But when your body becomes such a hindrance to your capacity to remember God, then you can let it go. So she went on for about 8 years. And Swami remarked afterwards that she gained a great deal of strength, a great deal spiritually. The reason Swami said that was because with the concept of reincarnation, if you don't achieve final liberation, and Happy did not think she would, and Swami seemed to think that she had a ways to go yet, you just have to take a child's body again, and you have to go through babyhood and childhood and adolescence and finding your way as an adult. He said all that energy just to get back to right where you are now, which is with your guru, with your community, with your practice. Best to just use this body as long as you can before you let it go. Happy herself had been to the other side several times, and death held no fear for her. She just wanted to know what was spiritually correct. And in the answer that Swamiji gave, it's been a great help to us all. And eventually she died. She would have been, it was a complications related to AIDS. In the book, Loved and Protected, these are books I've written, Miracles and Answered Prayers, there's a beautiful story written by Michael Gornick, who had power of medical decision-making over her. And when she was sick in the hospital, it's a very moving story of her appearing to him, in vision, and decisions that had to be made in the last days of her life. Next picture. Trimurti, just enjoying himself. Next picture. Priya and Karen Gamow somewhere. Next picture. And Mangala, who's a nurse practitioner. For a long time, she worked with Dr. Peter in the clinic and then went on to develop the, I want to use yoga therapy, therapeutic yoga. I'm not giving her credit. They have a special program that she created, therapeutic yoga, yoga therapy, that's what it was called. She was integral in developing that program with Maitri also. Next picture. This is Santoshi. She, I think this must be some kind of a backdrop for some kind of a play. Santoshi's had many different roles in the community. She lived in India for a time. She lived in Palo Alto. She was the force that actually enabled us to start this community. She put together a group of sympathetic investors, and they still lease the property to our community. She also worked for a long time helping with the schools. She has had a long and illustrious career within Ananda. Next picture. This is the staff now at our Ananda Seattle group. Essentially, Purushottama and Lakshmi, who had been there for a number of years, traded places with Hriman and Padma on the left. And Hriman had been working in financial management for many years in the Ananda village, and it was really time for him to change roles completely. I think Padma was still head of the publications business at that point. So Puru came in and took over the publications, and Hriman and Padma went to Seattle, where they are still. So they started a 30-year cycle there. Dharmadas and Nirmala and Devarshi and Maria. Next picture. This is a picture of the community in Seattle, the apartment community. They duplicated, as did Portland, as did Sacramento, the idea that an apartment complex is a ready-made community. So this is a picture of the community they have in Linwood, which is right outside of Seattle. Next picture. There was a bookstore started by Jamie and Darlene Potter. This is Karen and David Labriere. Jamie and Darlene Potter started a metaphysical bookstore called New Renaissance, and Karen has been an employee there for many years. Next picture. Prem Shanti, and also at New Renaissance. The store is still going, but the area in which the store is located, things have begun to change. So I've been told recently, there's some questions about its future. And Jamie passed away a few years ago. He got brain cancer. Next picture. This is Prem Shanti working 2 doors down. Ananda Portland also started a the health food cafe, the Song of the Rose. I think it was Song of the Rose was what they called it. And this is Prem Shanti also working there. Next picture. And the kitchen crew, Diva, Prem Shanti, and Daniel Schilling, I think his name was, in the kitchen there of that cafe. Next picture. This is back at Ananda Village. Now we just have some special events. There was a woman there named Lori who was a choreographer, and she was always coming up with wonderful dances for the children. And this was a mother-daughter dance, several couples. I'm pretty sure that this was a birthday party for Swamiji, where they called a tribute to Swami Kriyananda, and many different people, like 60 different people, got involved in all these different presentations, including this mother-daughter dance, which you can see was absolutely dear. Saraswati and her daughter Lisa, and Duti and her daughter Miriam. Next picture. This was a Mother's Day swimming party at the pond. Next picture is that's just Priya and her son. Next picture is the comparable Father's Day event a little bit later. You can see part of the reason I was realizing why there's been sort of a gap in the children at Ananda Village particularly is because there's an interesting generational gap in the residents, which is my founding tribe, and we were born mostly in the late 40s. And then there are the millennials who were born in the early 90s. And there are few people in between, but there's no sort of generational group. There's a big group of millennials, and there's a big group of, I guess we were called baby boomers. But whatever you call the group in the middle, there's just not that many. There's some, of course, and it's not a question of quality. It's like the karma of the generation was different. I had an interesting thought about it, which I'm just making this up, but it was interesting. The world has changed so much in the millennial reality, just the way people think, the technology, the globalization. There's just so many changes that the real leadership of Ananda is going to pass basically from the founding members to the millennials. And if there had been a bigger group of people in the middle, it's not that some of those people or many of those people won't maintain their positions, but the bulk of the population globally is from the baby boomers to the millennials. And the millennials are in tune with the world as it is. If there had been that long cycle and they would have had to wait for their leadership position to come to them, Ananda might not have been able to continue so dynamically. This is what I call reverse engineering. You look at what God has created and you try to wonder why he did it. Because there's no reason why we couldn't have had a large group there. It's just we didn't. So next picture. And of course that affects the birth rate too. This is a school event. This was what we call a joy-a-thon. People get pledges and walk certain distances. Swamiji had his hips replaced. The 25th anniversary, he had hip replacement surgery. So he was able to walk. So he pledged, he got people to pledge or pledge for himself. And so there he is back in the back walking with the little girl at his side, and Narani and little Christian. And it looks like Barbara Bingham, who did not have children that young, even at that time. So, or grandchildren that young, but maybe she borrowed a baby for the occasion. Next picture. Just Sarah Dog and Rick Morehouse. Swami again in the back. Next picture. This is Rajasi Day. This is our annual May event where we take on where most communities have a Rajasi Day. The village Rajasi Day was a huge event, hundreds of people focused on many different projects, big sort of community transformation day. Kirtan at the end of the day. Next picture. This is Jyotish working. I believe on this time they finished the little temple dedicated to Lahiri Mahashaya. This is Jyotish working on that project. Next picture. I'm not sure if it's the same project, but Devi laying down stone. Next picture. Haridas is inside the Lahiri Mandir working. His helmet says Shiva on it, I guess. Okay, next picture. This is the little mandir, which is between the lake and the main buildings of the expanding light. And in just a moment, we'll show you the inside. Now let's go inside. Oh no, this was the dedication day. For some reason, I was not there for this, so I don't know for sure, but the children were parading across the meadow to dedicate the Lahiri Mahashaya Mandir. Next picture. And this is inside. We have this beautiful life-size statue. Swamiji came in to help dedicate it. Next picture. It's beautiful. It still is. It's just a small little temple with a wonderful statue of Lahiri and absolutely marvelous vibrations. Next picture. This was a family service at Crystal Hermitage, walking, strolling kirtan. Next. And this was Janmashtami, Krishna's birthday, celebrated in the garden of Crystal Hermitage. And at first I thought that was a cardboard cutout, but it's actually a person with their skin painted blue to look like Krishna. And in the next picture, he apparently established himself in the gazebo, and everyone came to get Krishna's blessing. We just love these events. Just why not? Just find ways to celebrate and celebrate spiritual occasions. Next picture. These are just different things that happened in this year. Very creative year. Dharma Widman is an astrologer and a Sanskrit scholar. And so he gave a weekend program in sort of basic Sanskrit. So this was his class. Those who were interested in that, he just, people came from various centers, and he was very, very good at teaching you how to pronounce and get the basic principles of Sanskrit. Next picture. This is a quiz. There's no prize for it. This is a very well-known founding member of Ananda. Show us the next picture. And that is a woman named Maya Cram next to him. It's actually Jaya. For those of you who know him, if you look very carefully, you can see Jaya in it. Jaya always seems a little impersonal, a little detached, but he has a very surprising side to him. This was Halloween. This wasn't just Sunday service, but you can see how pleased he is by the smirk on his face. I don't know who he was supposed to be, but whoever he wasn't himself, and he's clearly enjoying it. Jai at that time was the manager of Ananda Village, I think, or at least had a prominent leadership role there. Next picture. Oh, now we have a series of weddings. I'm pretty sure this wedding was in Italy. The woman, Deborah Gitanjali, she's called now. She's American, and her husband, Yogindra, is Italian. So one of the ways to solve the visa problems is just fall in love across the borders, and then you can live in both countries. So they were married, Yogindra Gregorelli there. Next picture. This is Prem. You saw him earlier with his stepfather Nitai and his best man Narada. Narada, Nitai, Prem, Haridas, and Prem's mother Kalyani. They all went to India together. They took a trip to India like it would have been in the late 70s or the early 80s, when none of us were going to India. So they just felt inspired to go. We raised money for them and they went. It was before Anandamoyi Ma died in 1982, and it was before then. So they all got to meet Anandamoyi Ma, which only a few of us ever did, but they were among them. So next picture. Prem married Terry, the young woman in the middle. Haridas and Roma did the ceremony. Within Ananda, there's so many ministers and light bearers that when it comes to special occasions like funerals or weddings or baptisms, we just all have our affinities and our friends. And Prem and Haridas were very good friends because of that India trip and just the family association. Next picture. So Roma and Haridas conducted this wedding. Mirabai could sing beautifully. I think she sang for the ceremony. Next picture. Haridas giving Prem good advice, I'm sure. Next picture. And that's Kalyani in the pink dress, mother of the groom, just at the reception. This was all at the expanding light. a big community event because Prem had been with us since he was 7 years old, 6 years old perhaps. So he was known and loved by everyone. Next. This is Leela and David Hugendijk's wedding. David was Swamiji's first friend, first devotee, first student. David lived in San Francisco in the early 60s and knew Swami there. And he lived in he moved to Grass Valley. He worked, when he moved to the village, he worked as an engineer in a company in town. It was just, he was very quiet, extremely deep. And it was a beautiful relationship between them. Next picture. Durga and Vidur were the best people for Leela and David. Next picture. Swamiji didn't conduct the wedding, but he blessed them. Leela was Swamiji's cook for the last 10 years or so. And when David retired, they all moved to Italy because Leela moved wherever Swami was. And after about 7 years of marriage, David went out running one day with Devarshi, with his friend. He said, I don't feel very well. And he sat down on the curb and died. His heart just stopped. They were in Europe. They brought his body back to the temple, and everyone said the atmosphere around him was extraordinarily elevated. Swami said he called him an angel. He was just an angel. Leela lived for, I don't know, 5 or 6 years after that. And she cooked for Swamiji every day. She traveled with him. She went from country to country with him. On her birthday, she had a July birthday close to mine. On her birthday in 2012, in the middle of July, like July 6th or 7th is her birthday, she cooked Swami's dinner. She took off her apron. It was her birthday. The next day she went to the doctor in Grass Valley. They were at the village at that point. The doctor told her what she had not said to anyone, which is she was riddled with cancer. And she lay down and she got up. She died like 5 or 6 weeks after that. We were in the middle of filming Finding Happiness, and we were in the Crystal Hermitage. She lived in a little room right part of the Crystal Hermitage complex. And she was dying, and Tim Kretzmann was dying of cancer when we were filming that movie. And the movie crew was so astonished by the way the community was responding to death, the courage, the kindness, the way we took care of each other, the way we kept people at home, and figured out ways that they could die at home. And so much so that the producer of the movie, Roberto Bessi, one of the producers, he felt we just had to put into the Finding Happiness movie something about death, which if you watch the movie, there's a scene in which I talk about death in the community and Paula dying. And that was, we might have done it anyway, I don't know, but it was because the crew itself really felt that we really had something to say that people didn't know about dying. And it ended up to be my privilege to talk about it. So she died in August 2012, and Swami died in April of 2013. So not much long after. Okay, next picture. Now we're in India. This is our 1993 pilgrimage event. Next picture. This is us playing cards on the train. And Stephen Manis and Nayaswami Kamala and me over there in the red. I don't ever play cards. I have no idea what we were doing. Must have been a long train ride. Okay, next picture. Mantra Devi and Leela. Obviously, we've just been blessed by a pujari and sprinkled with flowers. I have no idea where. Next picture. Asha and Linda Gerber. On this trip, we went to Jaipur for the first time, and you can do these wonderful tourist thing where you go to a palace in Jaipur, and those were our own saris, but they give you crowns. And let's see the next picture. I think. Oh no, there's a picture of all the men in turbans, and they bring in camels and serve you a wonderful dinner. It was absolutely marvelously fun. This is let's see, Sukanya. Sukanya's Hare Krishna's niece. She was helping me obviously put my sari on better than I could put it on myself. Next picture. And Kent and Shraddha Williams got married in India at Master's house, 4 Garpar Road. And so we had our wedding ceremony, but in their house, in the living room of their house. Wonderful. Next picture. And this is in Serampore, and the older woman in the white sari right in the middle of the picture, Mira. Mira was the wife of the son of Master's older brother, Ananta. Ananta had died, and in 1935, when Master went to India, his son Ramakrishna, it was time for him to marry, and Master personally found Mira and arranged the wedding. Mira was the sweetest, dearest person, and they lived in Serampore, and there we are. You see, David has a growth of beard there, which he never had during that time. I'll explain to you in a minute why he did. David Praver in the back there. Next picture. This is Vidura and Mira. They had a very, very sweet, close bond. Next picture. This is in this temple in Delhi. And we would go there every year. And it was some kind of a festival during this period of time. And they would invite our whole group to get on the stage and perform kirtan. And then they took us into a back room in these little cement buildings back there, and were serving us tea. And while we were sitting back there serving tea, somebody came through and in a language we didn't understand started shouting, "Fire, fire, fire, fire." And we got the word Agni, which is, and this was actually an outdoor temple, a concrete pavilion. No, excuse me, a concrete stage. Some of the buildings were concrete, but for the festival, they put up this huge cloth pavilion. There were several thousand people in front of us there. And they wired it with electricity and all of this, and it caught fire. The whole pandala caught fire, huge fire. As the pandala was, tent was big enough to cover several thousand people. And the buildings themselves were stone, but all the accoutrements were flammable. So we all picked up our stuff and raced out of the building. It was a very, very, very dramatic. I won't tell the whole story because I've already spent so much time. I led one group straight across the street, straight through some buildings, straight back into some courtyards back there. Another group went parallel to the temple. The group that went parallel to the temple, some of them got burned somewhat, because even though they were across the street, the temple fire was so hot, the heat, people's arms, Durga got burned on her arms. One couple had to go home because they really did get burned. They had to go home for hospital care. Everyone else was just mildly so. Vidura and David went back into the temple to see if they could help. Immediately it was clear that they couldn't. They were then trying to get out of the temple complex. Let's see, how did this work? They were running together toward this 8-foot wall. And David says he does not know how, but he suddenly found himself on the other side of the wall. But he had his hands still facing the fire, and he was looking down below him, and his hands and the side of his face burned. Vidura was right behind David. He heard, they were running in linear way, not next to each other. He was right behind him. Behind him, Vidura heard someone. He turned around, there was a mother and a child. And in the time it took Vidura to turn around and look back, the fire came between him and David. And then, so Vidura then, being very quick thinking, he just took this woman and he realized that all the buildings around them were concrete, that the fire was just burning the burnables, even though it was huge and hot. So he rushed with her into this little concrete room and just pushed her in and held her in there, and the fire burned around them. And in 15 minutes, it was all gone. But now we're all way out on the street. Vidura is not with us and nobody knows where he is. And it was about 45 minutes because nobody had any shoes on because we were inside the temple. And it was too much hot cinder. He couldn't come out of the building. And he had to wait till everything cooled enough for him to come out. So it was always known as the pilgrimage of the temple fire. And because David had the burns on his face, he couldn't shave. So by the end of that, he had a black beard, which as soon as Swami saw it, he said, shave it off. So by then he could, so he did. Durga carries scars to this day. It was, as you can well imagine, very exciting. Okay, next picture. Swami's birthday, 1993. I believe this was the same as where the mothers and children were dancing. Next picture. Swamiji. Now, the music we're going to listen to is, I believe, the Rubaiyat. Am I correct? Or is it the other song? I can't remember right now. I forgot to write it down. God's Call Within. I didn't really talk about anything I was going to talk about because one of the things that's still going on right here is in this 93, I guess I did, is the whole issue of the lawsuit and our position vis-a-vis SRF and our role as disciples. So I wanted God's Call Within because it was a year of extraordinary deepening of our commitment, not to our personal spiritual life, but to our responsibility as master's disciples. So it was a very important changing year for us. So let's listen to Swami sing God's Call Within.
Listen, listen, whispering within your soul, hints of laughter, hints of joy, sweet songs of sadness, of quenchless yearning for the light, for my love, your true home. Long your heart has played the dance, long you've toyed with merest shadows of the treasures left behind you, deep in your soul. Long you plumbed the dark for answers, long you've begged from beggars' empty hands, gifts of life they too were seeking, gifts none could share. Friend, how long will you wander? Friend, as long as you seek your home in a land where all are strangers, love locks her door. Leave to the weak his craven life, to the coward leave his dreaming. Oh, my saint, wake up, reclaim the light, seek the truth behind all seeming. Leave to the weak his craven life, to the coward leave his dreaming. Oh, my saint, wake up, reclaim the light, seek the truth behind all seeming. Turn, turn, turn within, in silence of soul, in cave of love, find my abode. Listen, listen, whispering within your soul, hints of laughter, hints of joy, sweet songs of sadness, of quenchless yearning for the light, for my love, your true home.
Wow. All right, my friends. There's so much that happened this year that in 93 that was so wonderful. I'll just try to pick out some pieces of it. It being the 25th anniversary of Ananda, Swamiji had developed really terrible. Oh, no, it was in the 20th that he had it. Let me just get this straight for a second. He had his hip replaced again in the 25th anniversary, and all through the from 1990 all through these years, and I talked about it at great length last time. You know, Swami's body became the battleground for the causal war that was going on for the future of Master's work. And every time there was an opportunity, it looked like Divine Mother would take a chance and give Swami another challenge. The prosthesis broke and he had to have the hip replaced for the third time. Swami would say he had 3 hips replaced. And in the middle of it, he started to bleed and he lost a great deal of blood and almost died again. And it was just sort of in every way that he could. As he said, you have to have a body anyway, you might as well use it for some good. So that was how he thought about that. We had let me just think. I think one of the most significant things that happened, perhaps the most, in 1993 was the judge's ruling that SRF did not have the copyrights to the original writings of Master, that SRF had the copyrights to their edited versions. But the first edition of Autobiography of a Yogi was quite different than the subsequent editions. The first edition, I don't have it to hold up in front of you. If I thought about it, I would have brought it with me here. It has a blue cover. The one that SRF publishes, they publish it with an orange cover. So it has been, ever since that, the blue autobiography or the orange autobiography. Now, what happened was when Master wrote Autobiography in 1948, he made references, but very lightly, to there being an organization that he'd founded. And it was a very universal book. After Master died, and bear in mind, Master died in 1952, and Swami was at the heart of what SRF did for another decade. He was put on the board of directors. He was the head of the centers. He was the main minister. He became the vice president of the organization eventually. So he was privy to all the conversations. So everything I say is from that. And gradually, they began to make what ended up being hundreds of changes, all small changes. I mean, a phrase here, a word there, lot more footnotes, but also changes to the text that gradually made SRF more and more important in the context. And there are a few very significant changes, like it says the original autobiography, as Master wrote it and published it, said that one who wants to learn Kriya Yoga should learn it from a qualified Kriyaban. Kriyaban is someone who practices that technique. Subsequent editions say that if someone wants to learn Kriya Yoga, they need to learn it from an authorized representative of Self-Realization Fellowship or Yogoda Satsanga Society of India. As Swami says, nobody speaks like that. Master said a qualified Kriyaban. The book says, but it was changed in the text. So the innocent person reading it feels that Master himself emphasized the importance of the connection to the organization. It was all about making the organization important. When Lahiri Mahashaya miraculously found himself with Babaji in the Himalayas, and Babaji initiated Lahiri Mahashaya as his disciple from a former life into the Kriya Yoga technique. And then instead of keeping him there in the Himalayas, which is what Lahiri thought he might, he sent Lahiri Mahashaya, back to his life in Varanasi and told him to give Kriya Yoga to everyone who sincerely seeks it, which means, I want everyone to have Kriya Yoga. That was what Babaji said. Now there's an asterisk on that statement, and there's a 32 lines of footnote explaining how from when Babaji initiated Lahiri Mahashaya, it gradually worked out that now you have to take it from SRF, Self-Realization Fellowship, or you go to Satsanga Society of America, and that the only person who's actually authorized to give Kriya is the president of those societies, and everyone else is just a stand-in for her presence. I mean, there are organizational nuances to something like that, which means that the president can take the ordination away from you. If you have been, this was a direct result of a lot of things. But that means that if you separate yourself from the organization, your authority to give Kriya is automatically rescinded according to their rules, rather than it being given to you as a devotee, all kinds of things. There's another, and this was my personal least favorite, where it's about the Guru's blessing. It says, early editions of Autobiography of a Yogi include a publisher's note saying, Yogananda Ji told his students of East and West that after his passing from this earth, he would continue to watch over the spiritual progress of all Kriya Yogis. In later edition, the Guru's promise is limited to those who are students of the Self-Realization Fellowship lessons and receive initiation from SRF or YSS. I say naturally, the reader assumes these are Master's own conditions. SRF strays far from Dharma in making a change like that. Master's blessings is a sacred trust between Guru and disciple, and no one has the right to condition that commitment. So for all these reasons and many others, all of a sudden, Autobiography of a Yogi has been declared to be in the public domain. That means nobody owns the copyright on it, because copyrights do not last forever. Copyrights expire at a certain point. The copyright had expired. So all of a sudden, we could publish it. And Swamiji only himself read the original Autobiography of a Yogi, and we had long ago borrowed Swami Kriyananda's book, Xeroxed it, and sold it for the cost of it, so that we all had these big notebooks with the original Autobiography of a Yogi in it, but it wasn't widespread, and many people just picked up the orange book and assumed that Master wanted them to become members of SRF, which was not at all what his original intention had been. So now we could publish it. But for Swamiji, it was an enormous dilemma of Dharma, not making the book available, that he really wanted to do. But for so many years, he'd been so careful not to do anything that directly challenged the credibility of SRF, that went head to head, that they do this and we do that. Now, in the 3 years of the lawsuit, we had been forced to take a stand much stronger than we had ever taken before. But Swamiji was mindful of the importance of harmony among disciples. And he was also profoundly respectful of Master's organization, and he didn't want to suddenly be in direct competition. So he mulled over this decision for a very long time. And then he called all of the life members of Ananda and the light bearers and the ministers. And he said, basically, this is not a decision I alone can make. This is a decision we all have to make together. And I mean, our natural desire was just to publish it. But Swamiji was always very conscious of the implications of what he did. And what finally decided, it was actually really interesting. News of the litigation was leaking out, and the decisions were not a secret. And we began to hear of several other publishing companies that were going to publish the original AY autobiography because anybody could now. We didn't own it any more than anyone else did. So Swamiji decided, well, if it's going to spread out that far, we want there to be some, what would you call, magnetic spiritual authority behind this book, so that it just doesn't become misunderstood. So for that reason, we decided to publish. Now, we also decided to celebrate. We celebrated the 100th anniversary in 3 different ways, and I'll show you some pictures of this in a little bit. We had this for Spiritual Renew Week, which was at the end of August then, now it's at the end of June. We had this centennial celebration in which we invited our friends from India and other direct disciples of Master, and I'll talk about that in a moment, for a wonderful week-long event, which turned out to be just marvelous. And of course, what could be more dynamic than to publish the original autobiography of a yogi in time for that 100th year anniversary? And we never made any secret of what we intended to do. So it was known that it was going to come out at the end of August. We would present it. At the beginning of August, we received what is lovingly called in the legal profession a cease and desist letter, which is the first salvo that lawyers send out. It's the protocol. You write to whoever you're about to sue, and you demand that they cease and desist whatever it is that they're doing that they think you shouldn't be doing, and they have a right to enforce that opinion. So we got a cease and desist letter from the SRF lawyers, in which and when we responded that we were neither going to cease nor desist because we had a perfect right to do it, their lawyers, money being no object, filed an emergency motion with Judge Garcia to get an injunction against our publishing autobiography of a yogi. It was really crazy, because Judge Garcia himself had written the opinion that put the book in the public domain, and there was no new information, no new legal arguments. So Judge Garcia knew they didn't have a leg to stand on, but we had to go to court, and we had to spend again another tens of thousands of dollars to get Judge Garcia to affirm again that indeed we could publish it. So then what they did, there was a magazine called Publishers Weekly, and it was the trade journal for the book industry, which of course at that time everything was on paper. And so they put out this ad, big full-page ad, and it was actually, and I really want to give credit where credit is due. It was a brilliant strategy, and they carried it out extremely well. They had a big picture of their autobiography. They made no reference to what we were about to publish, which was very classy of them not to mention it. They just described the fact that theirs was the only complete edition of Autobiography of a Yogi, because we were publishing the first edition, and the second up to the third edition, Master was still in Master's lifetime, if I'm not mistaken. So they could claim that everything that was up to the third edition, they actually claimed everything up to the 12th or 13th edition, which is what they were up to by that point, was exactly as Master wanted it to be, even posthumously. All of the changes that were made, they claimed were directly from him. Swami knew for a fact that wasn't true, but it didn't matter. So theirs was the only complete edition. In other words, don't accept any substitutes. Now here's the reason I'm telling all of this, because Swami's response was so extraordinarily good, as he always was. Some people saw that ad and were just outraged. How dare they? How dare SRF say these things, make these claims? We were just really upset, and sort of a group came over to Swamiji and showed him the ad, kind of slapped it on the table and spoke in somewhat outraged terms. Swami was also quite dismayed, but he was not dismayed with SRF. He was dismayed with us, for those people who were outraged by it. And he said, have we become so fixed in our own opinions that we can no longer see the logic of anyone else's? He said, if I'd been responsible in SRF, he said, this is exactly what I would have done. And I mean, it was. I thought, when I saw it, I thought that was a really smart counter move. It was very well done. He said, if we become so fixed in our point of view that we can't even understand the logic of someone else's point of view. And then Swami became very concerned, and the phrase he uses, that we were hardening our hearts against our Gurubhais and SRF. And it caused for Swamiji quite a crisis of conscience. And he invited all the community leaders to come to Ananda village, and he held a very serious meeting, and he wanted us to think together if there was any way that we could defend ourselves against the terrible threat that that litigation presented and still not have to actually criticize what SRF was doing. I mean, we were in an awful position because SRF by this point was talking to other people, publicizing, not yet among their own members, but there were certain other spiritual groups that had gotten involved in the question of whether the word self-realization was generic. I didn't bother to say this. It happened in 1992, but what happened was, in order to prove that self-realization was generic, we got about 10 or 12 other American spiritual groups to write declarations saying that they use this word too, and that they didn't want it to be the exclusive property of others. We felt it was an important strategic move because the judge needed to understand that many people's rights were at stake, not just ours. So they wrote these declarations. After the judge ruled against SRF, the SRF people contacted all of those spiritual organizations and entirely blatantly misrepresented to them their behavior, their SRF's behavior, SRF's motivation, SRF's actual legal action, the decisions and that they'd made. It was, and those groups did not appreciate that. So we heard about it right away. So it was, so we had to speak out. We couldn't not speak out because disinformation was being presented that was making us seem as if we were behaving in an undharmic way. So we had this meeting with Swamiji, and we tried to find a way to continue to carry on what we would have, the responsibilities that we'd been given, without denigrating SRF. And at the end, we couldn't think of it. We couldn't think of how to do it. And I remember at the meeting, Swami finally just said, we have to tell the truth. And this is just the truth. But you see, it was very difficult. This was not like something that we did without thinking about it. So the other thing that happened during 1993 was Swamiji was able to edit Master's commentaries on the Rubaiyat. And this for Swamiji had been an assignment that he'd been given when he was like 23 years old, that he had carried all this time until 1993. And when the decision about the copyrights was all sorted out, and it had to do with articles printed in the SRF magazines, and so it was very complicated because copyright law is complicated, because some of the articles were printed before Master's passing, some after. So the Gita commentary and the Bible commentary were not completely available, but the Rubaiyat was. And Swami just started editing, and he did what he later called guerrilla editing, not guerrilla, not like a big ape, but guerrilla like a warrior that just rushes in and does small things. Swami just carried it with him, and whenever he had any time, he sat down and he started going through it. And when he finished, it was such a thrill to him after all this time to have successfully carried out what Master had asked him to do. And he also said, interestingly, and he confessed it, he finally confessed it then, in The Path, his own autobiography, he talks about having a crisis with Master when he was, during that period of time when he was working with him, because Master was able to draw so many meanings from just a verse or two of the Gita, or as it turns out, the Rubaiyat. The way Swami explained, they said there were 5 different translations into English of the Rubaiyat, and they varied widely from one another. And Master would then draw an esoteric meaning out of one of those translations that Swami just, he couldn't see it in the translation. And he said he didn't doubt, this is talking about himself as a young monk, he didn't doubt that Master was his guru, but he began to doubt if Master was wise. And so when he found himself having to dive into what Master had said about the Rubaiyat, he had matured enough spiritually, and he had much more intuition, and he was able to go deeply into it. And it just, he said he had never forgotten the doubts that plagued him at that time, but he never knew what to do with them. And so now this too, it was like purging away this unresolved energy with Master. So we had the autobiography, we had Guru Bhai's, Swamiji's Guru Bhai's with him at Ananda village. He had finished the Rubaiyat. And oddly enough, we're having to raise hundreds of thousands of dollars, ultimately millions of dollars, from a few hundred people who were not wealthy people in themselves. And at the same time, Ananda Palo Alto was just about to buy a temple. Ananda Seattle has moved into a community. Ananda Portland is bought an ashram house and has 2 businesses going. So at the same time that all this energy and money is going in one direction, somehow or another, the power of Ananda is also building over here. And all of us were beginning to understand, as we paid attention, which most of us had not paid much attention, to the profound theological differences between the way Self-Realization Fellowship interpreted Master's teachings and the way Swamiji had taught us. And we were all beginning to really appreciate that what we were doing, as glorious as it was for our own spiritual growth, that we were also custodians of a very important aspect of Master's work. And one of the reasons we were able to raise so much money from people who had very little, relatively speaking, was because we all began to realize that for this hour was I born, and it was not the moment to hold back. All of this, you can see, has made Ananda what it is today, and made those of us who had to live through that very, very different devotees than we were when it began. And we're hardly finished. Goes on for another 10 years, not quite 9 years by this point, before we're done. Okay, friends, let's look at some more pictures, and I'll use them to illustrate other aspects that you might want to know. This is just one more of those beautiful pictures of Ananda Village from some angle or another. Let's get there. Where are we? What is going on? I guess that's Master's. No, it's not Master's Market. I'm not quite sure what buildings we're looking at, but it's really pretty, isn't it? Okay, next picture. Pardon me? On the left, it is. It has to be. What else would it be? I think the pictures, you know what? I think the picture is reversed. That's what's confusing it. The photograph itself is reversed. I think, maybe not. Anyway, this is Ayodhya. This is the area right above where Swami's, where Crystal Hermitage is, up the hill. It used to be just a collection of trailers, and now it's beginning to become, and is now, a very, very beautiful cluster of dwellings. Next picture. This was an event. I don't know what event this was. This was in the back garden of Crystal Hermitage. Swamiji was obviously leading us in something. I can't make any more sense out of it than that, but it was a lovely moment, obviously. Next picture. This is Narani with her class at that time. The man in the plaid shirt, the little boy in the plaid shirt with the glasses is Peter Kretzmann. I don't think any of those children are still as adults with us. Next picture. This is again one of the other little classes. Just the children are so charming. I just love these pictures. Okay, next. This is the junior high school. We didn't have a high school at that point. That's as old as we went, up to 8th grade. Carol Melner and Gordon Strom, I think was his name, were the teachers. Next picture. This was a family service at Crystal Hermitage. And obviously the girls are expressing something worth expressing. David Kessler was the minister on the side there. Next picture. We had an above ground, at the village, they had an above ground pool for a number of years. They may still have it, that they opened up in the summer for the children. Children also swam in the ponds, but the pool was very pleasant too. Next picture. Krishnabai, I think it was a Snow White, judging from the fact that she's holding an apple. It was a school play of some sort. Next picture. Just Easter Sundays again, when everybody's all dressed up. Next picture. Halloween, candy apples. Next picture. Alessandra Tosoto, dressed, she lives with her family. Her parents are Naria and Laura, and they're key members of the Ananda Sisi group, but for a few years, the whole family lived here. So there she is, dressed like a pumpkin. She's a very elegant lady, I can't imagine. Next picture. This was grandmother Moonbeam. Often people would convert their houses into some kind of special magic places. Children would come up and they would not only trick or treat, but they'd also have fantastical experiences. This was Mother Moonbeam for Halloween. Next picture. And we have another pumpkin. Next picture. And we had the pony club at that point, and there were a lot of horses on the property. There are horses on the property again. This must have been, I'm not quite sure, a parade, or it's winter time, so I don't know what the event would have been. Horses all look gorgeous though, don't they? Next picture. And we had several people teaching violin and also cello. So for the children had and piano. So children had a very good musical education. Next. Ben Skillman and a couple of others playing cello. Next. As part of the centennial year, what we did is we took a pilgrimage to Los Angeles, but this time we didn't even consider going to any SRF properties. They wouldn't have welcomed us, and we didn't want to go. But the two places that were very important for the Mahasamadhi of Master, his passing March 7th, 1952, was the Biltmore Hotel, where he left his body, and the crypt where his body is buried. So about 200 people and Swamiji, we all converged. We took a hotel in Redondo Beach, took over the whole hotel. And we had bus loads. A bus went from Ananda Village, a bus went from Sacramento, a bus went from Palo Alto. And probably there might have been others who flew in for the event from all over the country for like 3 days. So this was the Ananda Village bus setting out on our way, chanting our way down to Los Angeles. Next picture. Jivadan Netri, just part of the bus. Next picture. This is the place where Master, where the picture known as the last smile was taken. And it's also in the backdrop of where Master was standing at a podium. So it's right here where Master left his body. It's very interesting. The entire Biltmore has been remodeled. And what had been a ballroom, which is where Master, this big event was held honoring the ambassador from India to America. In 1952, India had been an independent country for 4 years. So having an Indian represent India to America was a huge honor. And it was just beginning that Indians owned their own country finally. So Master gave this big reception for the Indian ambassador. And it was in a ballroom, and this ornate background was part of the ballroom. Subsequently, the entire hotel was redecorated, and the ballroom became the reception area, became the front entrance. But this artwork back there was a fountain at the time, and it was declared an historical treasure because the artwork was unusual. And as a consequence, the hotel was not allowed to interfere with it. So because of that, we will always know forever exactly the spot where Master left his body. So it's right in front of the registration desk of the Biltmore Hotel. But for decades, people come in and they pronam to the fountain, and then they sit in front of the registration desk and meditate. And it's just part of the culture of the Biltmore Hotel, because that's the way it is. So there's Durga sitting there. So we all went to the Biltmore Hotel. We rented a big ballroom and we turned it into a temple, and we had events in that ballroom. And then we would all take turns going out and sitting where Master had left his body. In India, of course, this would have been a temple, because everyone would have known. So it was always amusing to us that we would just go into the hotel, wave to the hotel employees, and sit down to meditate. Next picture. This is the room where Swamiji would speak and we would meditate together. And Swami just told us firsthand the story of being there with Master and having Master leave his body. And it was so extraordinary to be in the place where it happened, listening to someone who had been there. Next picture. This was just kirtan, and this was probably Sunday service that we did there the next day. Next picture. Swamiji speaking on the Mahasamadhi night. Next picture. One of the things about pilgrimage is just that it was so darn much fun. I've been on so many pilgrimages, and all of a sudden you have no responsibilities. You just meditate, you go to holy places, you have wonderful meals together. And just as I have gotten older and older, I have a deeper and deeper appreciation for kindred spirits and the friendships that we have together. And somehow this wonderful picture, Devi, Jyotish, Vidura, David, I think it's Dave Bingham and Bella, Karen. Wonderful. Next picture. Now, when back at Ananda Village in August, when we had our centennial event, we had 3 direct disciples from the USA who came and were our special guests. This is Bob Raymer. I spoke of him last time because he took over for Oliver Black of Song of the Morning Ranch. And this is when they first arrived. We were showering them with rose petals and welcoming them. So this is Bob Raymer. Next picture. This is Hari Krishna Ghosh. He was from India. He came with his wife Anjali. He was a direct disciple of Master. Next picture. This is Peggy Dietz. She was Master's, also his direct disciple. We also have spoken about her earlier because she came into the story. She was a wonderful, sweet, devoted lady and very much of a character. Next picture. Hari Krishna with Arjuna and Paula. Many people don't know that Paula was Arjuna's sister. Paula died a number of years ago. They were brother and sister. They were very close. It was very hard on Arjuna when she left. Next picture. This is Anjali, Hari Krishna's wife, and Tulsi Bosha's daughter, Hashi. Tulsi Bosha was Master's boyhood friend. And Hashi never met Master, but she was in her mother's womb in 1935 when Master came to visit. And Master handed his mother an apple. He said, "This is for the baby in your womb." And the woman ate it. Her mother ate it. And the blessing of it came to Hashi. Next picture. Hari Krishna and Hashi and Anjali, that they were visiting the clinic, Dr. Peter's clinic. His head is above Anjali, and Yashoda and Gloria worked there. So they came over to see what Dr. Peter was doing. Next picture. This is Roy Eugene Davis, who is the 3rd American disciple who came with Jyotish and Devi at the small shrine we had at the entrance to Ananda Village at that time. Next picture. Swamiji with Roy Eugene Davis. They were young monks together. Swamiji was in charge of the monks. Roy was 18 years old when he came to Mount Washington, and Swami was the head monk and welcomed him there. So their friendship goes right back to the beginning. Next picture. Peggy Dietz went to see the school children. You see what she's holding on her neck is a rat. Peggy Peggy had a marvelous personality. She loved animals, and so the children are sharing their pet rat with her, and she's obviously immensely enjoying it, and they're enjoying her. Okay, next picture. Swamiji at the formal dinner that we had with Devi Mukherjee, Hashi's husband. All of these people are off the planet now. Okay, next picture. Peggy Dietz with Maria and Kirtani and Paula. Next picture. And this was the setting where all the disciples were gathered. There was Swamiji. We had it out in the outdoor amphitheater. It was, and they all sat on the dais and took turns speaking. It couldn't have been more wonderful. There was about 500 people there, I think. And I think for this one, we actually hired a different kitchen crew so that we didn't have to do it ourselves, so that we could just all be part of the event and nobody had to miss anything in order to serve everyone else. And for Swamiji, here he is, he's sitting on the dais with his Guru Bhais, and there's something who never happened to him. And we were all just so uplifted. It couldn't have been more glorious. And in as much as we'd been struggling for our lives in a very ugly situation for 3 years, it was a wonderful change of pace. And the profound inspiration really confirmed that we were doing the right thing and the Master was pleased. Next picture. Some kind of gifts. This might have been at the end. That photograph might be a picture that you're going to see in just a minute of all of these disciples together. But Ananda does things in a beautiful way. So we were really honoring our guests in the best possible way that we could. Next picture. Just the same, enjoying what the gifts they've been given. Look at them, they're buried in flowers. Isn't that lovely? Next picture. And this was a photograph, not on that same occasion, but of course the same weekend, of all of our guests for Master's 100th anniversary. We gave them gardenias, that's right. They're wearing gardenias because Master loved gardenias. Next picture. Then we took the Indian guests up to the Northwest. And so this is at the Space Needle in Seattle. Those are Lakshmi and Purushottama's sons, Andrew and Christopher, and David and Asha. Hare Krishna and Anjali at the top of the Space Needle in Seattle. Next picture. And on a ferry boat, just as a small thing, that sweater that Hare Krishna was wearing was handmade by Seva. It actually belonged to David Praver, but apparently Hare Krishna was cold, so it ended up on him. Just sort of the threads of friendship go through everything. Next picture. This is them with the little boys again, Andrew and Christopher. Next picture. I have no idea how we all ended up in those goofy hats, but apparently it was uncommonly sunny for Seattle and we were unprepared. So everybody's dressed in those big caps. I have no concept of why or where or what. But anyway, there we are. Next picture. And Lakshmi and Hashi and me. And then this is most of the Seattle community, the residents there all came out together for this portrait. Durga and Vidura and David and I hosted them because we had met them so often in India. We were all connected at that point. So we carried them. We traveled with them, I mean. Next picture. And this was the 100th anniversary, was also Ananda's 25th. So in the 4th of July weekend, which was actually Ananda's birthday, we converted that also into a 25th anniversary. So we had the pilgrimage to SRF for the Mahasamadhi. We had the 4th of July for the 25th. We had the centennial for spiritual renewal week. And then a group of us went off to India and got into a temple fire. So it was quite a year for everyone. And the autobiography was freed up and we were off and running. Okay, next picture. We had this big fair in which many aspects of Ananda were presented. We had lots of guests and maybe even some people from town. We had a song, mountain song at that point, which was Gifts and Clothing. This is Ganga Mata and Mary Foster. They were key people in that store. Next picture. This is all in the lawn in front of the market. Jaya and Michael together were key in running the community, managing the community. This is all about that. Next picture. This picture is a little confusing, so it might have been from another year because Swami's standing up and speaking, but other pictures of the crowd on this weekend don't look like this. So it was something that happened somewhere around this time. Could have been a county open house. Maybe we even had an open house that year, I'm not sure. Next picture. For the 4th of July, I think we had the 4th of July as the 4th of July, and then also had the 25th, because there's a lot of goofiness that goes with the 4th of July. But I've just run the photos together because I wasn't living there. I couldn't sort it out. Instead of having an actual young person, an old person dressed up like a baby. And we had this parade. The parade would go about 4 blocks, this huge parade. Half the community would be in the parade and the other half would watch it. Okay, so this is Father Time in the new year. Next, coming. This was the accounting department, and you can see they're all wrapped in adding machine tape, which in those days before computers. So Ananda Accounting was represented. Next picture. Mothers with strollers often formed little brigades for the 4th of July. The little girl in the middle with the red scarf around her neck is Kashama. That's her mother and her baby sister next to her. Mary Kretzmann pushing what must be David Kretzmann there. Okay, next picture. The tradition of the living flag, it may still be part of it. Various people each year would be commissioned to walk together as the living flag. So there you have it. Next picture. And the Wachewskis on horseback, living out their Native American incarnations, which a lot of us remember intuitively, if not actually. Next picture. And just for the kids, there's the backhoe filled with children. I think that is the girls' softball team, the little girls' softball team, and probably Bajrang, who was their coach, just piled them into the shovel, the basket, and brought them down the road. You can see there's not many people watching. Okay, next picture. Oh, the fire truck. Go back for just a second. One of the things they would do, the fire trucks would come and they would use the hoses, and it was, we were part of the volunteer fire department, or else I think we were able to access it ourselves. I'm not sure. Next picture. And this is again Rick Morehouse, who for some reason take a very military stance toward his responsibilities for the water and the telephones. And now he has a baby son. And I'd mentioned before about how talented Narani was as a seamstress. So it seems baby son Christian now has a uniform. The details of this are obscure to me, but the entertainment value remains even without information. So next picture. And what would the 4th of July be without barbershop quartet? Lakshman Simpson and Michael Gornick, Dambara, Jeff Rice. Next picture. And games, just you can see all the different things that are happening out there. It's always been a really fun day. Next picture. Devi and Jyotish, this must have been on the 25th part of it. However, it was played out on this weekend. Next picture. Just speaking outside. And the choir, every time we have to have music. All right, next. And this is the end of the photographs, and this is the chapter picture. This was Swamiji's birthday that year. And this is downstairs in his apartment at Crystal Hermitage. In the picture in the book, you don't see the cake and you don't see the color, but this one was much nicer. And we were not undoubtedly, but I believe we were having a birthday breakfast for him. On his birthday, he would have multiple events and multiple cakes. You can see how happy, what a very, very light-hearted, happy time it was. So what I want to play now is Swamiji singing some verses from the Rubaiyat. Even though Swamiji wasn't able to edit Master's commentary on the Rubaiyat until now, 1993, many years earlier, many years earlier, a melody, a perfect melody had come to him to sing the quatrains. So we'll have a few minutes of Swami singing some of the best known quatrains from the Rubaiyat. Many people think of the Rubaiyat as a tribute to human love, but it's actually a mystical poem about divine love. The original source of it was Zoroastrian, the Zoroastrian religion, which was a true expression of Sanatana Dharma. The Sufis were part of the Zoroastrian religion. Omar Khayyam was part of that. Gradually, the Muslim religion grew up around that. Zoroastrianism faded away. Mostly the Sufi sect within it was sort of absorbed into the Muslim culture, but they were not in harmony because the Muslim culture did not endorse the kind of mysticism that the Sufis followed. So Omar Khayyam had to write symbolically in a way that would not be easily interpreted. Otherwise, he would have been declared a heretic and it would have been unsafe for him. So that's why the meaning is there. Swamiji also commented that later, after he wrote this book, he had some experiences with people who understood Persian. And some of the things that were harder to understand in the English translation, he later learned were much clearer in the Persian. It was just in the translation, the meaning had been obscured. So the beauty of it, especially, you feel it anyway. But once the interpretation is there, you really understand what it means. But in any case, Swamiji offered this melody to help us feel vibrationally what all of these words mean. So we'll close now watching Swamiji enjoy his birthday and listening to him sing the Rubaiyat to us.
Awake for morning in the bowl of night has flung the stone that puts the stars to flight. And lo, the hunter of the east has caught the Sultan's turret in a noose of light. Dreaming when dawn's left hand was in the sky, I heard a voice within the tavern cry, awake, my little ones, and fill the cup before life's liquor in its cup be dry. And as the cock crew, those who stood before the tavern shouted, open then the door. You know how little while we have to stay, and once departed may return no more. Come fill the cup, and in the fire of spring the winter garment of repentance fling. The bird of time has but a little way to fly, and lo, the bird is on the wing. Here with a loaf of bread beneath the bough, a flask of wine, a book of verse, and thou beside me singing in the wilderness, and wilderness is paradise now. The worldly hope men set their hearts upon turns ashes, or it prospers and anon. like snow upon the desert's dusty face, lighting a little hour or two, is gone. Oh, come with old Khayyam and leave the wines to talk. One thing is certain, that life flies. One thing is certain, and the rest is lies. The flower that once has bloomed forever dies. Up from Earth's center through the seventh gate, I rose and on the throne of Saturn sate. As many knots unraveled by the road, but not the knot of human death and fate. There was a door to which I found no key. There was a veil past which I could not see. Some little talk a while of me and thee there seemed, and then no more of thee and me. The moving finger writes, and having read, moves on, nor all thy piety nor wit shall lure it back to cancel half a line, nor all thy tears wash out a word of it. A moon of my delight who knowest no wane, the moon of heaven is rising once again. How oft hereafter rising shall she look through this same garden after me in vain.